Good evening and welcome to another How To Academy. I'm Robin Ince and I will tell you a couple of things about tonight's talk. One of the ones that you most importantly need to know is that you will be able to ask questions towards the end. So when you start to get ideas for questions you'd like to ask our guest tonight, then send them to How To Academy and I will get them and we'll start asking those questions about 7:10. Today I'm very pleased. The person I'm talking to is research specialist at MIT, in particular looking at the intersection between technology and society, has just written this book, her first book, The New Breed, which is about one of those topics which has fascinated people for a long time, but now becomes an increasing kind of one with a reality. It's been science fiction for a long time, played around by people like Philip K. Dick, and now the real questions about what is the morality of how we might be able to treat things which have a level of artificial intelligence, things we might describe as robots, and indeed is there a point where we will have to find some way of also placing morality into them as well. And on top of that also she writes about pig trials, which are one of my favorite things. The French there, it's one of my books there, which has a lovely illustration there by Pearl Binder of a pig trial in France. So please welcome Kate Darling. Hello, Kate.
Hi, Robin.
Now, let's get started straight away. We will come back to the pig trials, by the way, because this is what I love. I really enjoyed the way that your book, it starts off and we think we're mainly going to be dealing with ideas of artificial intelligence and robots, and then the way that you connect that with our relationship and changing relationship with our pets, etc., and with domesticated animals is intriguing. But I want to just first of all get about your interest in robots. So who were your first favourite robots? I just did a documentary about the film Silent Running, and everyone loves Huey, Dewey and Louie. I don't know if you know Huey, Dewey and Louie, who helped Bruce Dern. Did you have favourite pop culture robots?
Oh yeah, we watched a lot of Star Trek Next Generation when I was growing up, and I always had a crush on Data. So that was probably my first robot crush.
And how much was science fiction apart? I mean, you mentioned great writers of imaginative fiction like Ursula Le Guin and Octavia Butler, and how much has that shaped the person that you become and the profession and research area that you're in now?
I actually credit science fiction for most of it. I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with science fiction that I can get into, but I grew up, my dad had all of the great like 60s, 70s science fiction, and anything from the pulp novels to the classics on the bookshelves, and I tore through them. And the thing that I really like about science fiction is that it really kind of opens up your mind to new ways of thinking about the world and playing with the idea that things aren't set in stone and thinking ahead as to what could happen if we stay on a certain trajectory or if we develop technology one step further than it is today. And I've always loved writers who can think about that, and particularly writers who think about how that impacts society itself. And I would say that that has, that interest and that love for science fiction has driven everything I've done, basically. I've always loved thinking a little bit outside of the box and trying to anticipate what's about to happen rather than just talking about the now. So yes, but the problem that I have with science fiction when it comes to artificial intelligence and robots is that we have a lot of the same narrative about robots taking over or robots replacing us. And part of the reason I wrote this book is because I wanted to counteract some of that narrative, because I feel like it seeps into a lot of our subconscious when we're talking about robots and artificial intelligence, whether that's about robots replacing jobs or about robots replacing our friends. I think that there's a lot of this subconscious comparison of robots to humans and a lot of these takeover narratives that have shaped our discussions. And so I wanted to provide a different analogy, the animal analogy, so that we can, again, open our minds and think about things in a slightly different way, a slightly different path forward.
It sounds also like you sometimes have problems with having the work of Isaac Asimov mansplained to you when you bring up your work as well.
Constantly, yes, people love, and I love talking about science fiction, so I'm happy to have conversations about the great works of science fiction with anyone at parties. But sometimes people are like, "Oh, you're interested in robot ethics? You should really read Asimov." And it's always it's usually men, older men who want to recommend Asimov to me. And when I tell them I've already read Asimov, they don't believe me or they want to tell me about it anyway. So that has happened on multiple occasions.
Because it's interesting bringing that up. Do you think, because I think I've definitely noticed a change in terms of, you know, science fiction was often very much seen like almost the kind of thing, the comic book guy from The Simpsons, that's the audience for it. And I think, and you know, going back again to people like Octavia Butler, it really feels to me like I think a lot of people who may well have kept it quiet that they like science fiction, and now I think it's a lot more open. I don't know how you feel in terms of men and women rather than the comic book guy.
I mean, yeah, I feel like there are a lot of great female science fiction writers. There's a whole spectrum of work out there, and in terms of who reads it too, I think that there are also people who read science fiction without knowing that they read science fiction. I mean, I view a lot of Orwell or Kurt Vonnegut and some of the people who sometimes get shelved under classic literature. I think they belong in the science fiction category. And I also think it doesn't help that, I'm going to say something controversial, but it's always bothered me. I don't know if this happens in England. In the States, in bookstores, it's always science fiction and fantasy are lumped together. Is that the same? And I feel like those are two very different things. And I like fantasy too, but I would, yeah, I think I feel like science fiction, everyone needs more science fiction in their lives. I feel like it gets a bad rap as like something that's just for nerds.
Yeah, it's an interesting bit, isn't it, that I think you can get elevated to a certain, like Margaret Atwood is so well respected and has won so many awards that if the kind of people pretend it's not science fiction now, because how could she win the Booker Prize twice and write, so you know, it's a fascinating battle, I think.
Exactly. Yeah, I actually just read Kazuo Ishiguro just put out a book, and he's, you know, famous Nobel Prize winning author, but I would say that his newest book and some of his older books are absolutely science fiction as well.
Yeah, definitely. Now let's get on to your work, which is, now I think we should explain to people what this is, because it feels like such a kind of recent change. But an AI ethicist. That was the first article about you. That's your description. So what for you is being an AI ethicist?
You know, I actually don't know where they got that from, because I've never described myself as that, but I'm also happy to, you know, talk about what that would mean to me, because I don't really have a good description for myself. That's the problem when you work in an interdisciplinary space. You have to kind of come up with different terms to describe what you do, and I haven't really settled on one. But yeah, AI ethics and robot ethics sounds very science fictional and sounds like not something that we would need to actually talk about seriously right now. But I do think that with these technologies coming into our daily lives and robots moving from being kind of behind the scenes in manufacturing and factories and coming into more shared spaces, there are actually a bunch of ethical issues that arise that are specific to these technologies. And so I do work at the intersection of these technologies and ethics and societal issues and legal issues, because I think that it's really important at this moment in time. And one of the things that's always fascinated me is how we treat robots and artificial intelligence very differently than other devices, not just in how we think and talk about them. We do have these science fictional notions where we give these technologies a lot of agency, but also in how we interact with them and behave around them. We give them a lot of agency, and we treat them differently than toasters or blenders or other devices that we've had in the past. And so I do think that, you know, the field of AI ethics or robot ethics or whatever you want to call it is actually pretty timely and important.
What do you think's at the forefront at the moment? What would you say is the most urgent area that we should be looking at?
Oh, that's a great question. And I actually think that the most urgent areas are that they're not ones that I work on, but there are fantastic people working on them. I would say the most urgent areas are automated weapon systems, because that can have like a huge impact and cause a lot of harm. But also I think that bias in artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence systems that are out there in the world today that are being implemented in hiring decisions or in courtroom decisions and having an impact on people's lives. We know from research that's been done by some of my colleagues that these systems can be very biased and make decisions that are harmful. And yet we have this idea that these technologies are neutral and couldn't possibly be racist or sexist or reinforce any of these things that humans do, when it turns out that they do very much so, and in a hidden and very insidious way sometimes. So I do think that those are the most important issues to address right now. The reason that my book goes in a slightly different direction and addresses different issues is because I feel like the things that I'm thinking about aren't talked about enough at all. And they kind of just fly under the radar. And some of the things that I find interesting, I think, are just on the horizon and not quite here yet, whereas some of the more urgent things are happening right now, but there's also comparatively more attention on them.
Well, let's go there then. So on the horizon, what for you is the most, and that's an interesting area, by the way, because I spent the whole day dealing with flat earthers. So the very nature of the horizon has been something I've been dealing with a lot. But what for you are those elements that you would like to see more in the public sphere?
Well, the book looks a little bit at the future of work and tries to look at some of the choices that we have and how we often fall into this very deterministic narrative of robots that can, will, and should replace people at work, or we should be creating robots that do human tasks. And I think that that's a self-fulfilling prophecy if we think about it that way. But we don't have to. We don't have to view it this way. And in fact, if we recognize that artificial intelligence works very differently than human intelligence, we could be designing and integrating technology that actually supplements and helps humans, the way that we've used animal skills for millennia to partner with us in what we're trying to achieve. So that's one thing. And then a little bit further on the horizon is also, in keeping with the animal analogy, we've treated a lot of animals like tools and products in the past, but also treated some of them like our companions and have even benefited from having companionship with animals. And I believe that we are also going to see a rise of robots that we treat in a social way and that we may be able to benefit from in health and education and just from having a relationship. And I believe that is coming as well. But that these questions, like these disruptions that are happening, they will raise a lot of issues around privacy and data security, or how we integrate the robots, or who benefits from the robots. And so we do need to be thinking through what is happening and trying to make conscious choices about what is happening, rather than just falling into this idea that the robots are coming and there's nothing we can do about it.
Because that was, I mean, in your book, it's very interesting when you look at those always horrifying statistics of just how much the wages of CEOs have gone up compared to the wages of general workers. And as you were just saying there, that ethical issue of what job is being taken and why. And this seems to me to be one of the intriguing problems is, when we were growing up, often we would read comic books which said, and then everything will be done by the robots, as if that would then be a great thing. But on top of where the jobs are taken and perhaps the lowering of the importance of workers, you have also the decreasing satisfaction of people. I mean, self-driving cars may be a great idea, but is it actually going to give you some amazing extra time? Because we've never had so many tools to make our life easier, and yet the statistics, certainly in the Western world, are that people are less satisfied and believe they're busier than ever before. And this seems to be an interesting contradiction when we sometimes talk about, the automating of our lives.
Yeah, I feel like our conversations around the automation of labor or anything are very superficial, and we often fall into this idea of, the robots are coming to take the jobs, like I said, or the automated vehicles are coming. We don't really see that there are different paths that this can take, and economists will argue all day over whether automation takes or creates jobs. And even if they come to the conclusion that automation is good for growth and it won't actually take away jobs from a bird's eye perspective, that is said from kind of a great academic height and kind of ignores the disruption and the pain that is happening on the ground. I think Peter Fraze once put it that way. And so I think that we do have quite a responsibility to stop thinking about this deterministically and start seeing that as these changes happen against the backdrop of unbridled corporate capitalism, it's going to go in a certain direction because we've made certain political and economic choices. It's not about the robots coming to take our jobs. It's actually human decision-making that is going to take jobs, disrupt things, actually harm people. And it is on us, even those of us who don't build or integrate the robots, to go out and vote or do what we can politically to set the right incentives so that these technologies can ultimately benefit people and benefit everyone and not just those at the top.
It does seem sometimes that we hear these ideas of artificial superintelligence as being a great threat, as if we're removing the fact that still the greatest threat to humanity appears to be humanity as a whole. You mentioned Sam Harris saying, I think almost exactly that artificial superintelligence was the greatest danger to humanity. And that's not really how you, I mean, you have an interesting comeback, I think, from Andrew Ng, isn't it?
Yes, Andrew Ng has said that worrying about artificial superintelligence taking over is akin to worrying about overpopulation on Mars. We're simply just not anywhere close to having artificial superintelligence. And while, maybe it's okay to think a little bit further ahead and anticipate problems, that is getting comparatively a lot of attention, and it's not where our attention should be focused right now.
So one of the things that you talk about our relationship with objects, the anthropomorphization that we do all of the time. And there's some very interesting parts of the book where we get to that point of what we are able to project a level of empathy onto, and then a kind of line where it seems to, we feel that we're repelled by certain images. So I'm interested, can you take us through these different kind of ways that you see, because you've been into a lot of labs, you've seen a lot of things which almost seem to have their own, they could appear to be sentient to us. Run us through those kind of the different relationships you felt you've had.
Right. So robots aren't sentient. We're not anywhere close to developing artificial superintelligence or even general intelligence. But the thing that has always fascinated me about robots is that people will treat them like they're alive, even though we know perfectly well that they're just machines. And we do this pretty consistently. Research shows this. So people will even take the robot vacuum cleaner, that's just a disc that moves around their floor, and over 80% of those have names, which people don't generally do to their regular vacuum cleaner. But the fact that it's moving around on its own, and the fact that we love to anthropomorphize things that have, that we perceive as having agency, it just leads people to treat robots like agents instead of objects. So I think that's just totally fascinating. And I first got interested in this when I bought some robot toys, and I realized that, so I had this baby dinosaur robot, and it could mimic lifelike behavior and mimic pain very well. And so if you held it up by the tail, it would start to squirm and scream and protest. And when I showed it off to my friends and had them do it, I realized I started feeling bad for the robot and telling them to put it back down and then petting it to make it stop crying. And it was just so weird to me because I knew exactly what was going on inside of the robot. I knew how it worked, and yet I still felt compelled to treat it with empathy and like it was alive. And so that really sparked a curiosity. And I've spent the past 11 or so years studying this and looking at how people empathize with robots, how we project all sorts of feelings onto them. And in the book, I explore a little bit further what that could mean, whether that is a good or a bad thing, in what context, whether there's a way that we could benefit from this connection, the way that we've benefited from connecting to animals. There is some moral panic that happens when people first learn about this effect, when they first learn that there's a baby seal robot that goes into nursing homes and that is used with dementia patients. And it's very cute. It's a baby harp seal. It makes these little movements and sounds and gives you the sense of nurturing something. And it's very helpful for a lot of these patients because it can calm them. They've been able to use it as an effective alternative to giving medication to calm distressed patients. But when people first hear about this robot, their immediate reaction is usually, I can't believe we're giving people robots instead of human care. When that's generally not what's actually happening with this robot. This robot's actually a replacement for animal therapy. And we don't have the same kind of panic when people get a therapy dog. So it's, I do think that there is a space to add robots to our toolkit of what we can use in therapy. And I do think that there's a space for people to even treat robots a little bit like pets and benefit from those relationships, even though they are completely one-sided relationships.